My presentation and the previous presentations, I think, will be available on website or available to download. So if you need to get into some of the text in the various slides, you'll be able to do that separately. In this presentation, I'll be discussing some key points from this book, which you can download from the main Memory of the World website or from the MOWCAP website. Now, as a profession, audiovisual archiving combines aspects of library science, archival science and museology. It deals not only with documents, but also with objects and aspects of intangible heritage. So I'll explain this as we go. Related to the larger concepts of documentary heritage and document, as set out in the 2015 recommendation on documentary heritage, I want to focus specifically on the audiovisual heritage. Obviously, it includes moving images and recorded sounds in their various formats, but it also includes things directly related to them, such as production material like scripts, publicity materials of all kinds, and objects such as iconic props, costumes, studio furniture used in production. The constantly changing technology of production, presentation, and access are an integral part of the heritage. Everything from an Edison cylinder phonograph to a modern vinyl turntable, from a hand-cranked film projector to a home movie camera, from a reel-to-reel tape recorder to a Walkman or an iPod. Audiovisual documents cannot be fully understood or appreciated without understanding the technology which created and mediated them. That requires nurturing the skills and knowledge to maintain and operate the succeeding generations of technology, as well as trying to protect the environmental context in which audiovisual documents were originally presented and interpreted. Vintage picture theatres, for example. Now, this is a key definition because our business is to preserve and provide access to audiovisual documents in all their forms. But the definition is complex. In the book, it's supported by 2 pages of exposition. It's something you need to think about. You need to consider whether and how it applies to both analogue and digital documents, as well as conventional sound recordings, movies and television programs. It's meant to encompass all aspects of websites, video games, music and movie downloads, YouTube, podcasts and other digital formats. It's meant to exclude text material where the computer screen is used as a surrogate for words on paper. But as newspapers increasingly move to online versions with embedded moving images, it becomes more complex. Now, moving images and sounds are subjective by nature. They have no objective existence. Sound is a series of disturbances in the air impinging on our auditory centres which we interpret in meaningful ways, as music, speech and so on. Images in motion are created in the mind if a sequence of still images is revealed in a rapid succession beyond a certain frequency threshold, often erroneously called persistence of vision. These sensations come from a recorded source mediated by technology. One can't hear a disc or tape with it by looking at it, nor watch a motion picture by unwinding a roll of film and looking at it. So audiovisual documents differ from text-based media which communicate through a code that is intellectually interpreted. There are ethical principles relating to the management of audiovisual collections and the conduct of their custodians, and a number of codes of ethics adopted by professional associations apply to this field. Legal matters relating to ownership of intellectual property and therefore control of access can be complex. For the most part, copyrights are owned by third parties, not by the custodial institutions. Preservation and access are 2 sides of the same coin. The purpose of preservation is access. There is no point in preservation for its own sake. Conversely, you do not compromise the preservation of an audiovisual document in order to give access on a specific occasion. It is access which justifies an archive's existence, which vindicates the expenditure of public funds on its activities. Access underlines advocacy, visibility, awareness raising, sponsorship support, and the development of a supportive constituency. Access for researchers not only benefits the researcher, but also the archive. It deepens the culture of the institution and gives it gravitas. Digital technology is greatly widening the possibilities of access. Back again. Young people especially will look first for your archive on the internet. What will they find? A static, basic website? downloadable images and sounds, an online catalogue, articles and other information sources, a blog. These things are no longer luxuries or novelties, they are expected. Does your archive have its own Facebook pages? Has it uploaded interesting images and sounds to YouTube? So I turn to preservation. As the pathways of analogue production and preservation give way to digital ones, we need to be fully aware of the implications, yet cautious in our choices. Digital media opens up wonderful vistas for archives in presentation, dissemination, preservation and interaction. Digital technology has a defining property which analogue technology lacks. It has the ability to copy files repeatedly without the loss of visual or sound quality. If preservation is forever, and that means thousands of years, then, at least in principle, this is the only way that audiovisual content will survive undiminished in the very long term. But it comes with a price. We have to transfer content from obsolete analogue carriers to digital carriers to ensure their survival while the technology is viable. This applies, for example, to all analogue audio and videotape and to obsolescent film gauges like 16mm. It is currently predicted that the global task is too large to be completed before the transfer technology reaches the end of its working life. So, it seems some of the world's existing audiovisual heritage simply isn't going to make it in time. There are many definitions of preservation and the related terms conservation and restoration. Just Google them and you'll see. Now, the definition used in the philosophy book is at the top. For comparison, I've picked just one of the many definitions of digital preservation which are around at the moment. Does the first definition implicitly embrace a second, or are they fundamentally different? And does preservation have different conceptual timeframes? Short-term, medium-term, forever? The practicalities of analogue and digital preservation are different. Some analogue carriers have short lives. Others will be stable for hundreds of years, and if properly managed, will require little regular attention. In the digital realm, that's not an option. The data and its environment must be constantly managed to survive. In both cases, accessibility will depend on the continued viability of the retrieval technology. And let's be clear, preservation is not a verb, it's an ongoing task. It's not a finite one. Nothing has ever been preserved. It's only being preserved. And in the digital realm, that's truer than ever. Many things contribute to the long-term preservation of an audiovisual collection. Here are some of them. All of them are crucial, but there is one that is of fundamental importance. What is it? Well, actually, it's none of these, but it's something we tend to take for granted. Long-term preservation cannot be guaranteed without stable institutional structures that work and that people can trust. Private collections are important and necessary, but all too often they do not outlive their creators. Institutions that have a life beyond individuals and beyond the shifting circumstances of the world around us are crucial. Over time, of course, institutions evolve, but as long as there is continuity and good governance, the collections are protected. It follows that institutions need a consistent and accountable framework of rules and policies on which public trust can be built, and this depends on appropriate legislation and best practice. Perhaps it sounds boring, but stability and predictability are everything. Stakeholders need to have reliable expectations and to know they are consulted and listened to. These are the two big words in our profession right now. We're in the midst of a huge transition in which analogue formats and preservation pathways are being replaced by digital ones. However, to argue that the future of digital is to oversimplify the complexities we face and the constant evolution of the audiovisual landscape. Both analogue and digital formats will coexist in our collections, and we need to manage both, practically and conceptually. Understand the difference. Analogue audiovisual documents are objects with a physical reality and uniqueness separate from their replay technology. Digital documents, like this PowerPoint, are not. They are manifested using data and software contained on a computer, and they are embedded within their technology. They are an abstraction. There's not always a neat division between the two either. Motion picture film is both analogue and digital. It's a physical object containing human-readable analogue images, but it is conceptually digital in its sampling of reality at a speed of 24 frames a second. Now here are traditional formats that we're familiar with: audio and videotape, audio disc recordings, and for the convenience of discussion, motion picture films. So let's look at them separately. Magnetic audio and videotape comes in many domestic and professional formats: reel-to-reel, compact cassette, formats like U-matic, VHS, Betamax, Betacam, and many more. Magnetic tapes comprise a thin plastic film with an oxide layer, either of iron or chromium, fixed on one side of the tape by a binding agent. While vulnerable to physical damage, they can also suffer from deterioration if the binding agent breaks down. Long-term preservation requires a management regime and storage in a controlled environment with correct temperature and humidity. However, the most serious preservation threat is not the ageing of the carriers, but the obsolescence of the playback technology. The marketplace has moved on, so to the extent that the only way of continuing the life of the content is to migrate it to current technology. In other words, to digitise it. And this must be done while the analogue technology and associated skills remain available. As in all analogue to digital transfers, there will be some quality loss. The traditional gramophone record, known as a pressing, containing an incised groove which carries the sound information, has been with us since the 1880s. The earlier shellac formulation was replaced in the 1950s by vinyl, when playing times were greatly extended. It was in turn supplanted in the 1980s by the compact disc, the CD. Now, pressings are stable and do not require specialised storage environments. With sensible elementary management, like storing discs vertically and not flat, they will last indefinitely. Provided the playback technology survives, the content does not need to be digitised for preservation. Interestingly, while the CD is now in decline, vinyl is a resurgent format and the technology remains in production. A century of experience has taught us a lot about the behaviour of film. Like analogue tape, it responds best to storage in appropriate temperature and humidity. There are several patterns of deterioration, such as colour fade and vinegar syndrome. These are not universal, but they're linked to particular types of film stock or other precise causes. Since some archives have film reels that are over 100 years old and still in good condition, it's possible that under good management, film has an indefinite life. As with analogue magnetic tape, format obsolescence is, and always has been, a problem. Over a century, different film gauges or widths have come and gone. Today, the once popular 60mm gauge is obsolescent, so digital migration is seen as the solution to concept of survival. It's now clear that the manufacture of the professional 35mm gauge will continue and will be the preservation medium of choice for some producers, so the associated technology will be maintained. In the digital realm, the optical disc is familiar in its various formats. A data stream of ones and zeros is read by a laser beam and manifested as images and sounds. Once thought indestructible, we now know that this is not a preservation format. The discs are a sandwich of materials which can delaminate. They are susceptible to handling and environmental change. They can become subtly unreadable. Some formats use data compression, algorithms which make them unsuitable for preservation. The preservation path, therefore, is migration to an uncompressed file format in a mass storage system. The audio CD is in gradual decline, being supplanted by internet-based file distribution, streaming and download. DVDs are holding their own but face the same competition. Increasingly, audiovisual documents are archived as digital files. They're not fixed and impermeable. Files must be maintained, backed up in multiple locations. Regularly refreshed, they remain complete and accessible, while hardware and software constantly changes. As far as possible, open source software should be used to ensure ongoing accessibility, free from proprietary controls. Data can degrade. There is leakage in solid-state devices, gradual loss of magnetic orientation in magnetic carriers, and breakdown or disk rot in optical media. Software also degrades. Changes in the hardware environment, bugs, evolution, and software entropy. If we are to maintain the integrity of data and its permanent accessibility, the management of data and software becomes a constant and growing financial obligation for audiovisual archives. Quality loss when you migrate is minimised if it is done carefully and to a high standard. A high-definition scan of an analogue image will produce a better result than a low-definition scan. Lossy data compression may save storage space, but the information discarded in the process can never be retrieved. Files that are uncompressed or use lossless compression are obviously preferable. Born digital documents are in a class of their own. Maintaining them in their original form, again, means avoiding data compression. Of course, the ultimate quality of your preservation copy, analogue or digital, depends on the form in which you first acquire the work in question. For audio, an original studio tape, a pristine vinyl disc or a CD are good starting points. For moving image, the equivalent is an original 35mm or 16mm negative, a pristine release print or a master videotape. But often these desirable beginnings are not available. We have to settle for the best copy available. It may be worn, it may need conservation and restoration, but hopefully we don't have to rely too often on low-resolution YouTube downloads or off-air VHS copies of television broadcasts. Now, for analogue documents especially, there's a relationship between the content and the carrier. As a matter of principle, an original always is retained after copying for its value as an artefact and because it will contain more information than any copy made from it. Further, improved copying methods may be available in future, and recourse to the original will be needed if this is so. Audiovisual documents are creatively shaped by the nature of the carrier. For example, the length of popular songs today was shaped by the 4-minute playing time of early cylinder recordings. Provenance information is often embedded in the original carrier. The nature and date of the carrier, let's say a 35mm film print, suggests the context in which its content was meant to be seen or heard, in that case a movie theatre of a particular era. Archaeology, there's archaeology. The carrier is an object which contains information about its original production and subsequent use in addition to its actual audiovisual content. Let me give an example. To fully appreciate some of the classic Daffy Duck cartoons, you must understand the nature of 35mm film and the cinema auditorium of the time, with its audience and its Academy ratio screen. This familiarity can no longer be assumed, so the point of many of the gags can get lost. In Duck-a-Muck, Daffy is playing around with the characteristics of the film strip as projected in a cinema. In this shot, the edges of the film frame are actually collapsing on Daffy. The analogue carrier makes its own contribution to the listening and viewing experience. That includes the audio surface noise and the artefacts and the quality and texture of the image. Film has random grains instead of geometric pixels. So, in a sense, change of carrier can equal change of content. For an audio equivalent, listening to an old cylinder recording through the original acoustic technology is a totally different experience to hearing the same recording on a CD through a modern sound system. So to summarise, a comparison of the features of analogue and digital documents. I won't read through them, but you can access the PowerPoint later on. Housekeeping. Storage and technical equipment can be expensive, but good housekeeping costs very little, and it is essential. Unless all items are systematically recorded in an inventory system, the collection cannot be reliably managed. A location numbering system keeps collections in order. Physical arrangement can conserve space by grouping like-sized items together, and this aids access. The storage place needs to be clean and physically secure. Collection items need to be tracked as they move around. Entry of personnel needs to be controlled. And disasters can happen to anyone. They need to be anticipated and a strategy prepared. Documenting the collection is the basis for managing it over time, establishing initial condition and technical characteristics, and monitoring use and deterioration. All actions taken in relation to each individual carrier need to be documented. As far as possible, observe international environmental standards in managing the storage area, and develop staff skills by both formal and informal training. With a digital collection, the filing system should be logical and allow you to locate each individual work as needed. Metadata tracks the journey and subsequent action on the file and needs to be maintained. A reliable management routine for refreshing files and updating the software is essential. Use open source software wherever possible so you maintain full control of your data, and back up in 3 separate locations. Accidents happen and losses can be total. In an imperfect world, we need to be realistic and practical. You do the best you can with the resource you have. So you prioritise, you buy time, and you aim for the next improvement. Maintaining your collection is an investment, not an expense. Help others to see it that way. Where do you seek advice? The CCAAA, the Coordinating Council of Audiovisual Archive Associations, is the peak body for the audiovisual archiving profession. Its individual members produce a range of authoritative publications. You can go to the website as a gateway and search the website of each member, and you find a lot of publications that set standards and give practical information. CPAVA is the professional community of audiovisual archives and archivists across this region. Established in 1996, it has formal relations with UNESCO. It accepts both organisations and individuals as members. There is an annual conference within the region at which strategic, technical and scholarly issues are discussed and teaching workshops are held. Some archives in the region are seriously under-resourced and much heritage has been lost. Much more is in danger. CPAVA is an advocacy organisation and encourages its members to use the provisions of UNESCO's 2015 recommendation on documentary heritage to draw attention to their respective governments to their need for adequate funding and legislative backing. CPAVA's Secretariat is in Manila and is the first contact point for those seeking help and advice. The post-digital age. Well, it is said that audiovisual archiving is a dynamic field, so what's the next big thing? Surprisingly, could it be the return of analogue media? Film manufacture is reviving and vinyl sales are rapidly growing in some parts of the world. And the change is being driven by young people, not nostalgic oldies. The reasons are fascinating, and I recommend the literature to your attention. It seems that the future for audiovisual archives is both digital and analogue. So as the saying goes, constant change is here to stay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ray Edmondson.